Racist cop tried to extort a black driver on the highway. He had no idea Internal Affairs was recording everything. At first glance, it sounds like another routine traffic stop on an ordinary stretch of highway. But sometimes the smallest decisions made in a few quiet minutes can reveal far more than anyone expects. When authority is tested, who is really in control, and how much can a single encounter change before the truth finally comes to light? Welcome, and thank you for spending part of your day here. Settle in as we follow a story where appearances can be deceiving, and every word carries more weight than it first seems. Now, let us return to that highway and see how one ordinary stop became anything but ordinary. The most dangerous badge is the one that believes no one is watching. The afternoon sun stretched across Interstate 75, turning the endless ribbon of asphalt into shimmering waves that rolled toward the horizon. Traffic flowed with the steady rhythm of commuters eager to reach home before dusk. 18-wheelers rumbled through the right lane, and families packed into SUVs drifted past mile markers without a second thought. To everyone else, it was another ordinary Thursday somewhere outside Atlanta. But for one man parked behind a line of pine trees just beyond the shoulder, ordinary was exactly what he hoped the day would appear to be. Officer Ryan Mercer adjusted the brim of his patrol cap and watched the highway through mirrored sunglasses. His cruiser sat partially hidden, its engine humming quietly while the radar screen flickered with passing speeds. Years on the force had taught him how to spot opportunity long before anyone else noticed it. Expensive vehicles. Out-of-state plates. Drivers traveling alone. Those were the stops he preferred. Not because they posed the greatest threat, but because they were the least likely to ask questions. His fingers rested casually on the steering wheel as a dark grey luxury SUV came into view, gliding effortlessly through the center lane at barely 5 miles per hour above the posted speed limit. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Behind the wheel sat a black man wearing a navy button-down shirt and driving. With both hands calmly placed at 10 and 2. No sudden movements. No loud music. No signs of panic. Just quiet confidence. Somehow that confidence irritated Ryan more than reckless driving ever could. He pulled onto the highway, eased behind the SUV, and waited just long enough for the familiar blue lights to burst to life. Their reflection flashed across the rear window, painting the polished paint with pulses of blue and red. Ahead, the driver activated his turn signal immediately and guided the vehicle safely onto the shoulder without hesitation. Dust drifted lazily into the warm Georgia air as both vehicles came to a stop. The man inside the SUV took a slow breath before reaching toward the steering wheel again, leaving his hands in plain sight. His name was Marcus Holloway. At least that was the name printed on the driver's license resting inside his wallet. His expression never changed as he glanced into the rearview mirror and watched the patrol car door swing open. He had driven this stretch of highway many times before, but today every second carried a weight invisible to anyone passing by. Ryan approached with measured confidence, one hand resting near his utility belt while the other adjusted the small body camera clipped to his uniform. His polished boots crunched against loose gravel until he reached the driver's window. Marcus lowered the glass halfway. Warm summer air drifted between them. For several long seconds neither man spoke. The silence itself seemed to tighten around the roadside. Finally Ryan leaned slightly toward the opening and offered a smile that never reached his eyes. "Afternoon," he said evenly. "Do you know why I stopped you today?" Marcus looked directly at him without raising his voice or breaking eye contact. "No, officer," he answered calmly. "I don't." Ryan studied him for another moment, as though searching for hesitation that never appeared. Somewhere beyond the shoulder, another stream of traffic rolled endlessly toward the horizon, completely unaware that within the next few minutes, a routine traffic stop would begin setting in motion the collapse of a secret that had survived far longer than anyone imagined. "Ryan." Mercer rested one forearm against the open window frame and looked slowly across the spotless interior of the SUV before returning his attention to Marcus. Every movement felt deliberate, as though he wanted the silence itself to become uncomfortable. The afternoon heat shimmered above the pavement while vehicles rushed past only a few feet away, their tires creating a constant wave of sound that swallowed every conversation taking place along the shoulder. Ryan finally spoke again. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Marcus nodded once. Certainly, officer. He reached carefully toward the center console, moving slowly enough that every motion could be followed without question. He removed a leather wallet, retrieved the requested documents, and handed them through the half-opened window with steady hands. Ryan accepted them without a word. His eye settled on the driver's license for several seconds before drifting back toward Marcus. You travel this road often? He asked. Whenever work requires it, Marcus answered. What kind of work? Ryan continued. Marcus offered a polite smile. Consulting. Ryan tilted his head slightly. Consulting is a pretty broad answer. Marcus remained composed. It usually is. Something about that calm response seemed to bother Ryan. He circled the front of the SUV with slow measured steps, studying the vehicle from every angle as if expecting it to reveal a secret. The paint reflected the late afternoon sun without a single flaw. The tires were new. The windows were clean. Everything about the vehicle suggested careful attention, yet Ryan kept searching for a reason to believe something was wrong. He returned to the driver's window holding the documents loosely in one hand. Do you know how fast you were going? Marcus answered honestly. I believed I was driving with the flow of traffic. Ryan gave a quiet laugh that carried no warmth. That is not what I asked. Marcus simply nodded. No, officer. I do not know my exact speed. Ryan leaned a little closer. Interesting. Nice vehicle. Expensive watch. Business consultant. You must be doing pretty well for yourself. Marcus met his gaze without hesitation. I have been fortunate. Another long silence settled between them. Ryan tapped the edge of the driver's license against his palm while studying Marcus with growing suspicion that seemed disconnected from anything written on the document itself. Cars continued racing past, each one carrying people whose lives remained untouched by the conversation unfolding only a few yards away. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor-trailer sounded its horn before disappearing beyond the next curve. Ryan lowered his voice. You know, paperwork can take a long time. Sometimes there are inspections. Sometimes there are additional questions. A traffic stop that should last 10 minutes can easily become an hour. Marcus listened without interrupting. I understand. Ryan watched carefully for signs of frustration, but there were none. Marcus remained relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel exactly where they had been since the stop began. The officer slowly folded the documents and slipped them beneath the small citation notebook tucked under his arm. Ryan continued with a faint smile, sometimes people appreciate an officer's discretion. Cooperation tends to make everyone's afternoon a little easier. Marcus looked at him thoughtfully, almost as though weighing every word instead of every implication. I always believe in cooperating with lawful instructions, officer. The answer was respectful, yet it somehow left Ryan dissatisfied. He had expected nervousness. He had expected impatience. Instead, he found quiet confidence that refused to crack. As another wave of traffic swept past beneath the bright Georgia sky, neither man realized that this conversation, calm as it appeared from the outside, was already becoming far more valuable than either of them seemed willing to admit. Ryan Mercer stepped back from the driver's window without returning the documents. Instead, he looked toward the rear of the SUV once more before slowly walking around it, taking his time as though hoping something suspicious would suddenly appear. Marcus remained exactly where he was, his posture relaxed, his hands still visible, his breathing calm despite the growing tension that seemed to settle over the narrow shoulder of the interstate. The steady stream of passing traffic continued only a few feet away, each vehicle disappearing into the distance without slowing, leaving the roadside isolated from the rest of the world. Ryan stopped beside the rear bumper and glanced at the license plate again before returning to the driver's window. Step out of the vehicle for me, he said in an even voice. Marcus looked at him for a brief moment before unfastening his seatbelt. May I ask the reason? He replied politely. Ryan answered without hesitation. Routine inspection. Marcus nodded once. All right. He opened the door carefully, stepped onto the gravel shoulder, and closed it gently behind him. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides while facing the officer. Ryan circled him slowly, studying everything from his polished shoes to the neatly pressed sleeves of his shirt. You seem unusually calm, Ryan observed. Marcus offered a small smile. Staying calm usually helps every situation. Ryan gave another quiet laugh. Not everyone thinks that way. He gestured toward the SUV. Mind if I take a look inside? Marcus answered with the same measured tone. Officer, is there a specific reason for a search? Ryan's expression hardened ever so slightly. Are you refusing? Marcus shook his head. I am simply asking whether there is a legal basis for one. The words hung in the warm afternoon air. Ryan folded his arms. You ask a lot of questions for someone who says he believes in cooperating. Marcus never raised his voice. I believe cooperation and understanding can exist together. The response seemed to irritate Ryan more than open defiance would have. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so it could barely be heard above the passing traffic. Listen carefully. I can inspect every inch of this vehicle if I decide to. I can call for additional units. I can delay your afternoon for as long as necessary while everything gets sorted out. You understand what I am saying? Marcus met his eyes without blinking. I understand exactly what you are saying. Ryan studied him for another long moment before glancing toward the highway to make certain no other patrol vehicles were approaching. When he turned back, his tone became almost conversational. Sometimes people appreciate practical solutions instead of paperwork. Everybody has somewhere to be. Everybody wants to avoid unnecessary complications. Marcus remained silent, allowing Ryan to continue. The officer tapped the folded citation book lightly against his palm. A warning is always easier than a citation. A citation is always easier than a lengthy inspection. It all depends on how willing someone is to make life simple. Marcus appeared thoughtful, almost reflective, as though carefully considering every sentence rather than reacting emotionally. Are you suggesting there is another option? He asked quietly. Ryan looked around once more before leaning slightly closer. Let us just say that some drivers know how to show appreciation for an officer's flexibility. For the first time since the stop began, the silence between them felt heavier than the sound of the interstate itself. Marcus lowered his eyes briefly before looking back at Ryan with the same calm expression he had worn from the beginning. I want to be certain I understand exactly what you mean, officer. Ryan smiled confidently, believing the conversation was finally moving in the direction he expected. He had no idea that every carefully chosen word was carrying far greater consequences than the delay of a routine traffic stop. Marcus allowed the silence to linger for several seconds, not because he was uncertain, but because he understood that people often revealed the most when they believed they had complete control. The warm breeze carried the scent of hot pavement across the shoulder while another wave of traffic rushed past without slowing. Families headed home, delivery trucks stayed on schedule, and commuters disappeared beyond the next exit, unaware that a quiet conversation on the side of the interstate was steadily crossing an invisible line. Ryan Mercer folded his arms and watched Marcus with growing confidence. To him, the hesitation looked exactly like uncertainty. He had seen it before. Drivers who calculated the cost of arguing. Drivers who decided that convenience was worth more than principle. He mistook patience for surrender, and that misunderstanding settled comfortably into his expression. Marcus finally looked up. If someone wanted to avoid unnecessary delays, he asked evenly, what would that involve? Ryan glanced briefly toward the passing traffic before lowering his voice another notch. Nothing complicated. Sometimes people understand that an officer has discretion. Respect goes both ways. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Respect is important. Ryan smiled. Exactly. We understand each other. Marcus never confirmed that they did. Instead, he asked another calm question. Would that mean there would be no citation? Ryan shrugged casually. That depends on how cooperative the situation becomes. The answer floated in the humid Georgia air, vague enough to avoid direct language yet clear enough to leave little room for misunderstanding. Marcus remained completely composed. His breathing never changed. His posture stayed relaxed. There was no frustration in his face, no visible anger, no attempt to challenge the officer. If anything, he appeared to be listening more carefully than before, giving Ryan every opportunity to explain himself further. Ryan interpreted the silence as encouragement. "Look," he continued, "you seem like a reasonable guy. Nice vehicle. Professional appearance. No reason for today to become more difficult than it has to be." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "I appreciate that." Ryan leaned one hand against the roof of the SUV. "The paperwork alone could keep you here for quite a while. Verification. Documentation. Additional review. It all takes time. But sometimes people value their afternoon enough to find a simpler path." Marcus lowered his eyes for just a moment, almost as though considering the proposal. "I suppose everyone values their time." "Exactly," Ryan replied quickly. "Time is valuable." Another quiet pause followed. Ryan believed he was watching a man calculate his options. What he could not see was that Marcus was carefully measuring every sentence, every implication, every pause between words. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was accidental. Every detail settled quietly into memory. The distant sound of a helicopter drifted faintly across the afternoon sky before disappearing behind scattered clouds. Somewhere several miles away, a freight train announced its approach with a long, lonely whistle. The ordinary sounds of everyday America continued without interruption while the conversation beside the highway grew increasingly significant. Marcus slowly reached toward the inside pocket of his jacket. Ryan's attention sharpened immediately, but Marcus moved with deliberate care. He removed a slim leather wallet and held it comfortably in one hand without opening it. Ryan's expression softened into quiet satisfaction. In his mind, the moment was unfolding exactly as expected. He believed the confident businessman had finally accepted reality. Marcus looked directly into his eyes. "Before I do anything," he said calmly, "I want to make certain there is no misunderstanding between us." Ryan answered with complete confidence. "There will not be any misunderstanding." Marcus gave a slow nod, his expression remaining impossible to read. The afternoon sun reflected across the windshield of the patrol car, briefly hiding both men behind a flash of brilliant light. When the glare faded, neither of them had moved, yet everything about the encounter had quietly shifted toward a conclusion that only one of them could already see. Marcus continued holding the leather wallet without opening it, allowing another quiet moment to pass. Ryan Mercer watched with growing certainty, convinced that the conversation had reached the outcome he expected. Confidence settled across his face, not because anything had actually happened, but because he believed he had already won. Marcus spoke with the same calm, measured voice that had never changed since the traffic stop began. "I believe clarity is important before anyone makes a decision." Ryan nodded casually. "I agree." Marcus looked briefly toward the highway where hundreds of strangers continued their afternoon, each one following a destination that had nothing to do with the quiet exchange unfolding on the shoulder. "Then let us be clear," Marcus said. "You are telling me that this situation could become much shorter?" "Depending on my cooperation." Ryan answered almost immediately. "That is exactly what I am saying." Marcus gave a thoughtful nod. "And by cooperation, you are referring to something beyond simply providing my license, registration, and insurance." Ryan glanced around once again before lowering his voice. "You are an intelligent man. I do not think I need to explain every detail." Marcus remained silent for several seconds, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. The silence encouraged Ryan to continue speaking. "Some people understand how the real world works. They respect an officer's time, and an officer returns that respect. Everyone leaves happy." Marcus slowly looked back at him. "I appreciate your honesty." Ryan smiled, believing those words signaled acceptance. What he could not know was that every answer, every carefully chosen phrase, every pause had quietly completed another piece of a much larger picture. Several miles away, inside an unmarked command vehicle parked near an abandoned service road, multiple computer monitors displayed live video feeds from different angles along the interstate. One camera captured the shoulder from a distance. Another focused on the patrol vehicle. Audio indicators moved steadily across a screen as every spoken word was recorded with remarkable clarity. No one inside the vehicle interrupted the silence. They simply listened. A woman wearing a navy blazer folded her arms while watching the conversation unfold. Director Evelyn Carter of Internal Affairs never took her eyes off the monitor. Beside her, Captain Daniel Brooks stood with an expression that revealed more disappointment than surprise. Neither of them spoke because there was nothing left to speculate about. Weeks of anonymous complaints had described remarkably similar encounters. Professional drivers. Tourists. Small business owners. Ordinary people who reported feeling pressured during routine traffic stops but lacked enough evidence for formal action. Individually, the complaints had never reached the legal standard necessary for discipline. Together, they painted a troubling pattern that demanded careful investigation. Marcus Holloway had volunteered to become part of that investigation long before he ever entered the highway that afternoon. Every route had been planned. Every timeline had been reviewed. Every possible outcome had been discussed in advance. His assignment had never been to provoke anyone or create a crime that otherwise would not have occurred. His responsibility was much simpler. Remain respectful. Follow lawful instructions. Allow every decision to belong entirely to the officer conducting the stop. Back on the shoulder, Marcus lowered his wallet slightly but still made no move to open it. Ryan interpreted the hesitation as uncertainty and stepped a little closer. "Trust me," he said with quiet confidence. "This is the easiest way for both of us." Marcus met his eyes with the same composed expression that had never once slipped. "I understand," he replied softly. "Please continue. I want to be absolutely certain there is no confusion about what you are asking." Ryan took a slow breath, unaware that the moment he believed was giving him complete control had already become the strongest evidence anyone could have hoped to collect. Ryan Mercer looked satisfied, almost relieved that the conversation had finally reached what he believed was its natural conclusion. The confidence in his posture grew more obvious with every passing second. He slipped Marcus's driver's license back into the small notebook beneath his arm but made no effort to return it. Instead, he rested one hand against the roof of the SUV and spoke with the relaxed tone of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "It does not have to be complicated," he said. "Nobody wants paperwork. Nobody wants reports. We both have better things to do today." Marcus remained composed. His expression revealed nothing beyond quiet attention. "I agree that unnecessary complications help no one," he replied. Ryan nodded with approval. "Exactly. That is why experienced people know how these situations usually work." Marcus lowered his eyes briefly toward the wallet still resting in his hand before looking back at the officer. "Then perhaps you should explain exactly what you expect." Ryan hesitated for only a moment before answering. "I think you already know." Marcus did not respond immediately. The afternoon breeze swept across the shoulder, carrying the distant sound of tires rolling over concrete expansion joints. A pair of motorcycles passed in the far lane, their engines fading into the distance as quickly as they had arrived. Everything beyond the shoulder continued as though this stop were nothing more than another routine encounter. Yet hidden from public view, multiple observers continued watching every second unfold. Inside the command vehicle, Director Evelyn Carter leaned slightly closer to one of the monitors. No one inside the mobile unit spoke above a whisper. Every sentence arriving through the audio feed was carefully documented in real time. Captain Daniel Brooks quietly reviewed the timestamps appearing beside each recording. There would be no debate later about context, sequence, or missing details. The evidence was building one statement at a time. Back on the highway, Ryan lowered his voice again. If someone showed appreciation for an officer using good judgment, then maybe that officer would remember the stop differently when the paperwork is completed. Marcus asked calmly, "Would that appreciation affect whether I receive a citation?" Ryan answered without hesitation. "It certainly could." Marcus slowly nodded as though he wanted every word to settle completely before asking another question. "And if I chose not to do that?" Ryan shrugged casually. "Then we follow every procedure available. We inspect everything. We verify everything. That could take quite a while." Marcus never appeared intimidated. Instead, he looked almost thoughtful, carefully measuring every answer. "I appreciate your willingness to clarify your position," he said quietly. Ryan smiled, believing he had successfully persuaded another driver to accept an unofficial arrangement. He had no idea that his confidence had become the investigation's greatest ally. Marcus finally opened the leather wallet. Ryan's attention immediately shifted toward it, expecting to see cash. Instead, Marcus paused with deliberate patience, allowing several seconds to pass before removing anything at all. The silence became almost tangible. Even the passing traffic seemed distant compared with the weight of that single moment. Ryan waited expectantly, convinced he was seconds away from ending the stop on his own terms. Marcus looked directly into his eyes, his calm expression unchanged from the moment the blue lights first appeared behind him. Without revealing what rested inside the wallet, he asked one final question in the same respectful voice he had maintained throughout the encounter. "Officer Mercer, before either of us takes another step, are you completely certain that this is how you wish to conclude today's traffic stop?" Ryan answered with complete confidence, never sensing that the question itself had quietly marked the point beyond which nothing about the afternoon could ever be undone. Ryan Mercer never hesitated. The confidence in his smile remained unchanged as he looked directly at Marcus Holloway and gave a slight nod. "I am completely certain," he replied. "You have a choice to make, and I suggest you make the smart one." Marcus held his gaze for another quiet second before giving a respectful nod of his own. "Thank you," he said softly. "That answers my question." The words sounded almost ordinary, yet something about the calm certainty behind them caused the atmosphere to shift. Ryan noticed it without understanding why. Marcus looked down at the open wallet resting in his hand and carefully reached inside. Ryan watched closely, expecting to see folded bills. Instead, Marcus removed a dark leather credential holder and held it closed for a brief moment. The late afternoon sunlight reflected across its polished surface as passing vehicles continued streaming down Interstate 75. Then, with slow and deliberate precision, Marcus opened it. A gold badge caught the sunlight first. Beneath it rested an official identification card bearing his photograph. Ryan's confident expression froze. Marcus raised the credentials just high enough for the officer to read them clearly. "Marcus Holloway," he said in the same calm voice he had maintained since the traffic stop began. "Senior Investigator, Internal Affairs Division." The word seemed to hang motionless in the humid Georgia air. Ryan blinked once, then leaned forward instinctively as though he believed he had misread the identification. Marcus did not move. He simply allowed the badge to remain visible. Every detail was unmistakable. The official seal. The department markings. The identification number. There was no confusion and no room for doubt. Ryan slowly stepped backward. The confidence that had filled his posture only moments earlier disappeared almost instantly. His eye shifted from the badge to Marcus, then toward his own patrol car, searching for an explanation that did not exist. Marcus calmly closed the credential holder and slipped it back into his wallet before speaking again. "Officer Mercer, this traffic stop has been documented from the moment your emergency lights were activated. Your body camera, your patrol vehicle recording system, and multiple independent investigative recording devices have preserved our entire conversation." Ryan opened his mouth as though preparing to answer, but no words came. Before he could gather his thoughts, the distant sound of approaching engines echoed across the highway. One by one, several unmarked sport utility vehicles appeared beyond the next curve. They traveled together with steady purpose before pulling safely onto the shoulder several yards behind the patrol car. Their emergency lights illuminated simultaneously, casting flashes of blue across the roadside. Doors opened in careful sequence. Men and women wearing professional investigative credentials stepped onto the shoulder without urgency or raised voices. Director Evelyn Carter emerged from the lead vehicle beside Captain Daniel Brooks. Both walked toward Marcus with composed expressions that reflected preparation rather than surprise. Marcus acknowledged them with a slight nod before turning back toward Ryan. "This investigation began months before today," he said quietly. "Your decisions this afternoon belonged entirely to you." Ryan stood motionless as Director Carter approached. She identified herself clearly, displayed her credentials, and requested that Ryan surrender his department identification and service equipment in accordance with departmental procedure while the administrative investigation moved forward. Captain Brooks accepted the items without argument, his expression marked by disappointment rather than anger. Around them, traffic continued flowing beneath the golden afternoon sky as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet for everyone standing on that narrow shoulder, the balance of authority had changed forever. The officer who believed he controlled every moment of the encounter now found himself answering to the very system he had underestimated from the beginning. The flashing emergency lights reflected across the passing traffic, but the atmosphere on the shoulder had changed completely. Only minutes earlier, Ryan Mercer had spoken with quiet confidence, believing every decision belonged to him. Now he stood in thoughtful silence while Director Evelyn Carter accepted the evidence package from one of the investigators. Nothing about the scene felt dramatic. There were no raised voices, no rushing movements, only the calm professionalism of people carrying out responsibilities that had been carefully prepared long before that afternoon. Captain Daniel Brooks opened a slim case containing printed documentation. "Officer Mercer," he said evenly, "this investigation did not begin today. Over the past 8 months, Internal Affairs received multiple independent complaints describing encounters that shared remarkably similar details. Individually, each report lacked sufficient evidence to support formal administrative action. Collectively, they established a pattern that required further investigation." Ryan listened without interrupting. His attention shifted briefly toward Marcus Holloway, who remained standing beside the SUV with the same composed expression he had maintained from the beginning. Marcus had never raised his voice. He had never argued. He had simply allowed every decision to belong to the person wearing the patrol uniform. Director Carter continued speaking. "Today's operation was designed to document a routine traffic stop under controlled investigative conditions. You selected the vehicle. You determined the reason for the stop. You directed every conversation that followed." She paused briefly before adding, "No investigator instructed you to make any specific statement or request. Every decision remained entirely your own." Those words settled heavily into the quiet afternoon. Ryan lowered his eyes for a moment, replaying the conversation in his mind. Each sentence that had once sounded harmless now carried a different meaning. Every pause, every implication, every opportunity to end the encounter professionally had passed without being taken. Behind the investigators, another unmarked vehicle arrived carrying evidence specialists who carefully documented the patrol car, the body camera recordings, and the digital recording systems according to department procedure. Everything was handled methodically. Every device received a chain of custody label. Every recording was logged with precise timestamps. Nothing was left to memory or interpretation. Captain Brooks closed the case folder and looked toward Ryan with visible disappointment. "The purpose of this investigation was never to embarrass anyone," he said. "The purpose was to protect the public, protect honest officers, and preserve confidence in this department." Ryan nodded faintly without offering a response. For the first time that afternoon, the weight of the badge seemed absent from his shoulders. Marcus quietly walked toward the patrol car and accepted his driver's license, registration, and insurance documents from one of the investigators, who had recovered them as part of the evidence review. He thanked the investigator politely before returning the documents to his wallet. There was no celebration in his expression. No satisfaction at another person's difficult moment. Only the quiet composure of someone whose responsibility had been to uncover facts rather than seek revenge. As the sun drifted lower across the Georgia sky, traffic continued moving along Interstate 75 with the same steady rhythm as before. Families drove toward dinner. Truck drivers continued long deliveries across state lines. Vacationers followed maps toward distant destinations. Most would never know what had happened on that narrow shoulder. Yet, the outcome would reach far beyond a single traffic stop. The recordings collected that afternoon would allow investigators to reopen previous complaints, compare evidence, interview additional witnesses, and examine whether other encounters reflected the same pattern. What had begun as one ordinary stop beside a busy highway was no longer about a single conversation. It had become an opportunity to restore trust through careful truth, patient investigation, and the simple principle that accountability belongs to everyone who wears a badge. The last evidence case was sealed just as the evening light softened across the horizon, turning the Georgia sky into broad shades of gold and amber. One by one, the investigators completed their reports, verified the recording logs, and prepared to leave the shoulder of Interstate 75 exactly as they had found it. Nothing about the highway itself had changed. Cars continued moving toward their destinations. Families laughed inside passing vehicles. Long-haul truck drivers watched another sunset through wide windshields. The world continued forward, unaware that a quiet lesson about responsibility had just unfolded only a few feet away. Marcus Holloway stood beside his sport utility vehicle for a final moment before Director Evelyn Carter approached him. She offered a firm handshake and a sincere smile. "Excellent work today," she said. "You remained professional from beginning to end." Marcus accepted the compliment with quiet humility. "The evidence spoke for itself," he replied. "All I did was give it the opportunity to exist." Captain Daniel Brooks joined them and looked once more toward the patrol vehicle that had started the entire investigation. "Most people believe accountability begins in a courtroom," he said thoughtfully. "The truth is that accountability begins with everyday choices that nobody expects to be remembered." Marcus nodded. "Every conversation matters. Especially when one person holds authority over another." Brooks smiled faintly. "That is exactly why this investigation mattered." As the investigative team prepared to depart, Marcus climbed back into his vehicle and placed both hands on the steering wheel exactly as he had done at the beginning of the afternoon. For a brief moment he remained still, looking through the windshield at the endless highway stretching ahead. He thought about the complaints that had arrived months earlier. Ordinary citizens who questioned whether anyone would believe them. People who drove away carrying frustration instead of proof. Some had doubted themselves. Others had simply decided never to report another encounter again. Today's investigation could not rewrite their experiences, but it could ensure their voices were finally supported by evidence instead of standing alone. He started the engine, checked his mirrors, and carefully merged back into traffic. Within seconds, his vehicle became just another part of the steady flow moving south beneath the fading evening sky. There was nothing remarkable about the way he drove away, and perhaps that was the most meaningful part of the story. Justice did not arrive with dramatic speeches or extraordinary displays of power. It arrived through patience, preparation, professionalism, and the willingness to let truth reveal itself one decision at a time. Somewhere behind him, investigators continued the careful work that would follow. Reports would be reviewed. Previous cases would be examined again. Procedures would be strengthened where necessary. Honest officers would continue serving with integrity, while those who had forgotten the responsibility that accompanied a badge would be required to answer for their own choices. The highway itself would remember nothing about that afternoon. The pavement would carry tomorrow's traffic exactly as it carried today's. Yet for everyone whose life had quietly intersected beside that roadside, one lesson would remain long after the flashing lights disappeared into the distance. Authority may command attention, but character earns respect. A badge may grant power, but integrity gives that power its purpose. And when truth is allowed to stand without fear, justice does not need to raise its voice, because sooner or later, it is always recognized for exactly what it is. Every story reminds us that real authority is measured not by the Power someone holds, but by the integrity they choose to show when no one seems to be watching. Trust grows through honesty, accountability, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is not the easiest path. Some moments pass in silence, yet they leave lessons that stay with us long after the road ahead looks ordinary again. May this story encourage us to value character over appearances and fairness over convenience whenever our own choices are tested. What do you think matters most when someone is trusted with authority and responsibility? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss another story. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time here on HOA Stories.